Hello and welcome to this event with Demos, with John Penrose MP and the fantastic Sue Tibbles, where we're going to be talking about the honours system. You will know that the honours system is a really important part of how a country shares its values and recognises success and contributions to that society. So as a charity called Demos, that believes in the demos, in building up a demos. It's something that's really important to us, something which we worked on in the early days of Demos's existence back in the late 90s. And I was absolutely delighted when John asked us to work with him on this event. There's just still a couple more people joining us. So I'm gonna I'm gonna talk slowly whilst the numbers tick through at the bottom of the screen. But this event is being recorded as well so that we can share it with a wider audience. Yes, I think so. I'm first of all going to introduce John Penrose. John is the MP for Western-super-Mare and has it's basically got a plan for fixing poverty in the United Kingdom. And one small part of that is actually bringing meritocracy into our honour system. I'll then turn to Sue. But John, if you could let us know, what are your thoughts about how we can reform our honour system?
Well, thank you very much, Polly, and thank you very much to Demos for, is it Demos or Demos, Polly? I'm never quite sure the right way to, I'm not enough of a classical
It's very on trend of you to be debating how to pronounce a Greek word. Pronounce it how you like. Personally, I say Demos, but you know.
There we are. Demos is good enough for you. It's good enough for me. Anyway, thank you very much to Demos for organising this. I'm really, really pleased to be here and delighted to be discussing this. And as Polly said, this is one part of a bigger set of ideas about how to level up opportunity and also to level up agency. So there's no point in having equalising opportunities so everybody has the same opportunities around Britain if you then don't have the ability to grab those opportunities, to grab those life chances as they come past. So there's a broader paper on the website. It's called Poverty Trapped, and with a rather fetching picture of a rather nasty trap on the front page. And this is one of the ideas in it. And as Polly rightly pointed out, it's about trying to make sure that we have a properly meritocratic way of recognising achievement, recognising effort, recognising talent in this country. And because we can't really, I would argue, suggest that we are a fair society which recognises and provides opportunities for everybody, we don't recognise those opportunities in a reasonably systematic and fair, even-handed way. And the problem at the moment with our wonderful, tradition-encrusted and thoroughly heritage and historic honour system is that I don't think anybody really knows on what basis we dish out the honours for at all. There clearly is a basis. There are clearly a set of criteria which are being applied because there's solemn committees that sit throughout Whitehall in the Foreign Office and in the Department of Health and in everywhere that say, well, you know, Polly deserves an honour and John Penrose doesn't, or the other way around, but no one can tell why Polly gets offered an OBE and I only get offered an MBE, or why anybody else is given a knighthood. And that seems peculiar. It seems at odds, I would argue, with a modern society which is trying to be transparent, which is trying to be meritocratic, which is trying to recognise the brightest and best, and incidentally, a society which is in the process of introducing a points-based immigration system, which is explicitly supposed to admit the brightest and best from around the rest of the world. How is it that we are able to produce, we think, a points-based immigration system which picks out the brightest and best of the foreigners, and yet we aren't seeming to be willing to do it on a transparent basis for ourselves? So my argument is, if you can have a points-based immigration system, why can't we have a points-based honours system too, which recognises the brightest and best from within British society? And I think we should. The advantages would be, and we would firstly have to have a proper public debate, to Polly's point about a demos, a public debate about what we value as a society and what sort of achievements we think are worthwhile recognising. And I would argue that, for example, if you want to take the best educators, you would take the people who run the biggest schools most successfully over the longest period of time, or the ones that have improved the most over an equivalent period of time. You could do the same thing for the top vets, for the top doctors, for the top diplomats, and for the top police people, for the top wealth creators, and the top accountants, and whoever it might be. But we should publish those criteria saying, here's why we think that if you are in this particular field, this is what good looks like. And you can also score yourself. So if I wanted to know whether or not I was going to be worth an MBE as opposed to an OBE, and whether or not I was going to get a higher ranking honour than Polly, I could plug in what I think I've achieved so far in my life and say, all right, well, that gives me X number of points. Is that enough to get me a knighthood or not? Or if I think that my mum is worth a knighthood, I can plug her in and work out whether or not she would be worth something as well. Now, why does this matter? I think it matters for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it means that we can be really, really clear about what the criteria are that we are valuing. And that means, for example, I would argue that we should definitely not have any points allowed for anybody who'd given any donations to political parties, for example. So it would improve the legitimacy of our honour system no end. Everyone would know that it was fair. Everyone would know it was being objectively, independently applied, and everyone could see whether or not so-and-so had earned enough points and why they got one honour and why someone else only got another. But it would also, I think, make the mean that we could then publish we could publish the results of the talent list each year, and then we could say, right, well, the top people, the people with the most points, they would all get peerages. They would be Lord this and Lady that. The next tranche down would all become Sir this or Lady that, as knighthoods and damehoods. And then below that, you get the various different OBE, MBE, and CBE ranks as well. But everybody would know that we'd earned it. Everybody would know that it was legitimate. And all of a sudden, success would not be something which would be a question of, well, are they really worth it, or is it just a question of who they know? It would be legitimate. Everyone would be able to know that, all right, I can aspire to achieving X. And I know that because Polly's done it, she's earned it too. So there's no jealousy attached, there's no envy attached. We know, or we would know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this is something which is to be admired and valued. And it would turn the system, I would argue, and add to its legitimacy, but turn it on its head because it would be transparent and because it would be clear. So, Polly, I'm going to stop there. And that's the outline of the thing. But I would argue that it is a way of turning our wonderful honour system into something that is fit and ready for the 21st century. So it carries on being worthwhile and has another 100, 200, 300 years of life in it, because everyone would know that it was genuinely meritocratic and earned.
Thank you so much, John. I'm now going to invite you to mute yourself. Great. I'm going to invite Sue, who, unlike John and myself, has an honour, so speaks from more experience. Sue, who is the Chief Executive of the fantastic Sue Mckay Foundation, which supports campaigners, but also a founding member, I believe, of the campaign Empire, no, Excellence, not Empire, which has got its own set of views about how we can reform and update our honour system. Sue, over to you.
Thank you. This feels like a bit like a sort of Dragon's Den, sort of, who's got the best idea to reform the honour system. And so to be clear, I am hearing about John's proposals for the first time, as are you in the audience at the moment. And that's right, I'm here on behalf of a campaign that I'm part of, that I've been probably the least helpful founding member of, so I feel a little bit like I'm taking some of the advantage and others have done the work, but there is a growing number of us from the social sector, from the voluntary sector, who are pushing a campaign called Excellence, not Empire. And it is a campaign that is suggesting a way to address a significant barrier in our honour system, to people feeling that they can accept an honour as an inclusive source of pride. And very simply, it responds to the fact that the word empire brings mixed and often very difficult associations and connotations for a great many people. Clearly, empire for some is a source of great epic pride and achievement, and that might be so in some ways, but it is also the case that there were a great many injustices that were meted out in our past as a empire, and that history continues and it has consequences for people today. And the empire, of course, doesn't even exist anymore. So to have an honour in the name of empire not only feels anachronistic, but it is continuing associations that are currently hurtful for people. We know that a great number of people don't feel able to accept an honour because of the word empire, particularly people of colour, which does seem a huge shame. And I was just reading, because on our website, the Empire Not Excellence, Excellence Not Empire, must get that right, website, those of us that are involved have each just written something about why it is important to us. And I was just rereading those short pieces, and a great number of people say, I was so proud to receive my honour, but also somewhat ashamed. And I was just sort of thinking again, what a great shame it is that people feel like that it should come with such mixed feelings. And for me personally, actually, I was given my OBE for services to sport because I ran what is now Women in Sport, but the main women's sport campaigning charity for 7 years, campaigning for women and girls to find it easier to get into sport and women's elite sport to be properly promoted and funded and so on and so forth. And there has been an enormous shift, I might say, and obviously due to a great many people and players, and as campaigners you never know quite what your direct contribution is, but I certainly lived at the centre of all that for 7 years. And when I received the letter, two things. One, I think it was literally the second time that I've been rendered speechless. First time was when I was a child and it involved a teddy bear and an unexpected gift. It was the second time that I literally was lost for words. And it really meant the most enormous amount to me, because I've had this unusual working life as a campaigner that doesn't come with a sort of recognised professional development path, and people socially were a bit perplexed when they ask what you do and you say I'm a campaigner. And it just meant an enormous amount to me. But my father didn't feel able to come with me to accept it because the word empire was there. And it occurs, and I respect him deeply for that. I went with my mum and my aunt and my daughter. But I think how much worse that must be if empire really means something personally to one's own family, rather than one is correctly recognising that hurt on behalf of others. So this is a very simple and practical change. It's something that has been called for since the 1960s and was actually a recommendation in a cross-party report in 2005. The Labour Party are calling for it too. And we feel that it is going to come, and it is an opportunity for the government to put itself on the right side of history and introduce a change that means that receiving an honour is an active choice to welcome and celebrate excellence in a modern, open and inclusive way.
Thank you very much, Sue. So it's now an opportunity. If you've got any questions or thoughts, please do post them in the chat, but I'm going to exploit the chair's privilege by asking my own question. I'll come to you, John. I mean, sort of the honour system, of course, belongs to the Crown. It is determined and technically offered in the honour of the Crown. And how does that kind of perpetuation of a monarchical based system, does that fit for you with this concept of a meritocratic society, or do you feel any sense of kind of conflict there?
I'm not a Republican, if that's what you're asking. No, I like the idea of the honour system because it's part of our heritage. But like every piece of heritage, you've got to keep the thing up to date. It's one of those sort of weird tensions, and because otherwise, anything that stands still in the end vanishes, stops being relevant to future generations. So no, I mean, I think it's lovely, and as long as we are a monarchy, which I hope will be for a very long time yet, then I think that it's absolutely fine to have that whole thing bound up. But that doesn't stop us as a society saying, well, hang on a second, it's time for a refresh, it's time for a rethink, it's time for an update. And I think there's a perfectly valid way of using the honour system to recognise and legitimise modern success and modern achievement. And I think it's marvellous that the royal family are often there to wield the sword and tap you on the shoulder if that's what is necessary in order to hand over your award.
So, what do you make of the kind of that monarchy involvement? And also, I wonder if you can just tell us, as a campaigner, like, why do you think, this has been called for from the 1960s, like you say, the empire, whether you love it or hate it, is not in existence anymore. Why is it that that it feels like the reform, the updating that John's talking about, just doesn't seem to happen?
So the first thing to say in terms of the monarchy is that we are entirely agnostic on that point. The campaign is not about making any comment about the association with the monarchy. Our campaign is around shifting the language of empire to excellence. And in terms of why now, I think in a rather obvious way, there has just been a much higher level of public debate and visibility to issues around race and our past as an empire and our colonial past. And I think all of us in society are being alerted to how that past is still present today and what that means for many of our fellow citizens living today, and how they reconcile that and how they feel comfortable living in the UK as a inclusive, multicultural society, as we are. And I personally am so very proud to say that we are. And yet we're struggling with that, aren't we? We know we're struggling with it, and we're trying to reconcile these histories and ways to live together. But that's why I think the moment is now. And I think that's why, as a group of campaigners, we feel that this is a moment to push and try and get, that pressure built so that the change is made. And our very strong suspicion is that there are a very great number of people who would just very simply and pragmatically think, well, of course, why ever not? And it would be, in my view, those who are trying to make mischief out of empire because they have a different incentive to create arguments in society that would fight against it. But my strong suspicion, and I wish we had the funds to do the polling, is that the vast, vast majority of people would very sensibly say, of course, this is a very simple reform that brings this into the modern era and would allow everybody, irrespective of how we deem who is worthy, John, but would allow everybody, no matter our own identity, to just be very clear that this is an honour and we're very proud to receive it, and it doesn't come with any shame.
So there's a brilliant question here from Roger Chambers, who makes the observation there are too many ranks and categories of honour for clarity, but also, how do you compare outstanding achievement? John, I'm really interested to know, in your plan for a points-based system, how do we decide what gets what points? And is snooker more important than public service?
That's why I think it's such a great thing that Demos is holding this event, because I will have my view, or you will have your view. Everybody here will have their own personal view. I think this is something which society needs to discuss, and we will come up with a points-based system in the same way as we're coming up with a points-based system for admitting the best and the brightest from around the rest of the world if they want to come and live in the UK. But it shouldn't necessarily be something which is then set in stone forever. And in a generation's time, or in 2 generations' time, they may say, no, hang on a second, we completely disagree about snooker. Or we, those people 30 years ago got it all wrong about football, or whatever it might be. I would argue, though, that at the moment, there are some groups which don't seem to be getting very much recognition, and some that do. I think it really, really helps at the moment if you are known to the Westminster and Whitehall bubble. And you tend to get recognised if you are. If you are a really, really brilliant wealth creator or top vet or whatever it might be, who doesn't necessarily intersect with or interact with the Westminster and Whitehall bubble, your chances of getting noticed, even if you are superb at what you do, even if you're one of the best in the country at what you do, are much, much less. Now, why is that? It can't be right. If we want to have something that genuinely recognises the best and the brightest, let's be systematic about it. Let's be transparent about it. Let's get the demos to agree on what the points should be. and then let's put them up there and let's publish the results and let's see where people rank. And wouldn't that be a refreshingly transparent approach to the whole system? And then everyone would know that it's been earned, not because of who you know.
Can I just add to that, just to build on that, because something that I didn't know until I got involved in this campaign is that the honours were introduced in 1917 as a way to thank people for their voluntary effort during the war. So they were very much directed towards volunteers and the voluntary sector. And I'm not suggesting that it should go back to that. And I completely agree, John, that there is, at worst, I suppose you would call it a level of cronyism. And we know that. We see awards being given out to sort of friends of or hairdressers to serving prime ministers or whatever else, you know. However, it is also the case that there are many people in the voluntary sector who do receive awards, and the ways in which that happens are somewhat mysterious. I know when I worked actually in the sports sector that we were quite often asked, who do you know, in your networks that you think is really worthy of. So it is opaque, but there are sort of channels through that you don't literally have to be, I think. So I suppose my question would be that I know for a lot of those people, they're often people that are really genuinely unsung, and for whom what they do, it may not be even in a sort of currently recognised way to be valuable. And that's often the case for campaigners who might be campaigning on things that in that moment are contested and quite sensitive. So I suppose I have just an immediate slight anxiety that your points-based system would mean that people like me would never, I mean, this isn't about me, but do you know what I mean? That people in the voluntary sector who are doing difficult things, contested things, would never get awards, and it would go to people who are doing things that are much easier to recognise, like, for example, I don't know, it worries me a little bit, it'd become a bit like that Best of Britain, which is a bit mawkish, and it's people that have, saved drowning pets or, work in the front line of the NHS. I mean, there are so many brilliant people, aren't there, doing brilliant things. There is something a bit different about the system that does allow for people doing unusual things do actually come through. Imperfectly, I know.
But I think sorry, Molly, go on.
No, I was just wondering, in that context, what you make, if you have thoughts on it, on the Points of Light kind of awards that are given out basically every day by the Prime Minister, which I like in principle, but I just don't like the visual metaphor, because there's only points of light on a dark background, and it's rather a bleak vision of human society if you only have points of light. But nevertheless, I wondered, if you had thoughts about that as well.
So I that was where I was going to go in my response to Sue, because I think that there are a couple of different things that we're currently asking the honours system to do. Some of it, incidentally, is we've still got the hereditary system with us. And I think that's a very odd overhang. So wouldn't it be good if we knew that everybody who had a title of any kind had earned it off their own merits rather than because of something their ancestors did to help the king or queen at the time. But I think that under the modern system, it's trying to do two things. One is to recognise achievement, to show that someone's done something which is truly unusual, big, impressive, difficult, and worthy of recognition. But to the point about volunteerism, I agree with you, Polly, that it's quite possible that we might want to find a better way of describing the award than Points of Light. But there is something as well about volunteerism. Some people who haven't done something which is big, but is nonetheless impressive. I'll give you an example. In the village I live in, they were recognising through the Royal British Legion a little while ago a couple of people who had been selling poppies for 50 years, every single year, come rain or shine. I don't think that they particularly set any records each year or anything like it, but they've been dedicatedly turning out for a cause that they believed in for 50 years, most of their lives. And they clearly deserved something. It's not quite the same thing as a sort of massive achievement and running an enormous school and turning it round or whatever it might be. But it's nonetheless legitimate. So I think it helps to have different kinds of award so that you can recognise those two rather different things in different ways.
So another question has come in. Should people be able to nominate themselves for an honour? which I wonder whether that helps to tackle your, the left behind people or neglected or unsung heroes, because they can nominate themselves, or if in the end you just get the same self-confident people who believe in themselves coming forward.
It's very. I mean, so to be honest, I'm here to represent that call for the word empire to be changed to excellence. I haven't got any ready-made answers as to how you make sure the right people do receive an honour, and I accept it's imperfect and it's very difficult, isn't it? And at the moment, of course, you're not supposed to know who nominated. It is purposefully opaque. And in terms of nominating, I mean, I think just one very practical point, which I'm sure is true, is that it is being administrated in a relatively lean way. So the funds that would be required to run something that was attempting to be open and fair, I'm sure would be quite of a different order, but that might not be a reason not to do it. I was going to actually just pick up on Maeve's question, if I could, which is to say, shouldn't we consider a more radical solution and sort of start from scratch? And my mind went there as well when I first asked if I wanted to be involved in the campaign, and sort of thought, why wouldn't you just do that? And in many ways, I think it's good to be thinking about everything else that can be changed, and John's suggestions are welcome. I think, and maybe John would say the same about his, I think our view is that in changing the word empire, it signals a readiness to think again about the honour system. It, at least in the very immediate term, in fact now it could be done, for the new year, it would allow us to make a change. It would signal to everybody that there is a willingness to just keep reviewing and thinking about how do we honour fellow citizens in a way that feels current and in line with our values as a society. So it's a sort of first step, and we're not suggesting it's the only thing that should be looked at. But as a campaigner, you often start with something that you think raises the profile of an issue or a problem, and know that if you can get some momentum around that, you can then build other things behind it. But at least this one change to the language would make, I think it would make a very big difference to an awful lot of people that either currently have honours or who might be offered them, and who are, as so many have written on our website, feel deeply conflicted as to whether they should receive them.
It's great to be reminded of, obviously you have enormous expertise as a campaigner, and of course, like you're focused on one thing and not wanting to be distracted by 23 other things, which is a great campaigning tactic. So I'm sorry for urging you to, think about lots of other stuff. John.
I just wanted to pick up on this notion about who does the nominating, because I would like, the whole point about having a properly transparent system where you publish the list and it's online, and anyone can work out where they'd fit in that list if they wanted to, is that anybody can nominate you or me, or you can nominate yourself if you want to. And you can decide you don't want to be nominated, you don't want to be involved. But in the same way as, I suspect it's probably a deeply unworthy thing to do, but quite a lot of us, when the Sunday Times publishes its rich list, I always have to turn right to the back to see the people who are sort of propping up the bottom of it, and think, I'm still miles off, earning anything like what they earn. But what would I have to earn in order to rank 1,000 from the Sunday Times rich list? Gosh, it's that much. You'd be able to do that.
You have to go and work for the British Virgin Islands, don't you?
Or something like that, indeed. But you'd be able to do that for the talent list too. You'd be able to say, all right, look, I'm running a school. I'm a sort of senior. I'm a senior partner in a law firm, whatever it may be. How many points does that give me? Oh, well, that would slot me in at number 997. What would I have to do to get to number 850? Because that's where I would start to qualify for something if I wanted to. So I think probably if you put it up there and you make clear how you get it, quite a lot of people would just quietly go and have a look and see where they would sit. And you could nominate yourself, but your mum could nominate you, or your work colleagues could nominate you, and that would be absolutely fine, because it wouldn't matter who nominated you. It would be clear whether or not you deserved it on your own merits either way.
Isn't there just a danger? It sort of feels like writing a list of Christmas presents that you want, and then you get the precise things on your list. It like takes the fun out of it and the mystique and the uncertainty. No?
Well,
Wouldn't people contest it? And they'd like fill in an appeals form about whether they got 7 points in category P.
Well, so you'd be very, very clear about what the points were, and I'm sure if people felt that if they were being unfairly treated, that you'd want to be able to write in saying, no, hang on a second, I've done that job for 20 years, not for 15. So you're not, which would be objectively checkable and auditable if you wanted it to. But there'd also be a whole bunch of people who might get a whole load of points, but who didn't want to have anything to do with it at all. I mean, there are senior journalists who would turn down an honour on principle because they would not want to be accepting a bauble from a system where they need to be able to interview people without fear or favour and not be part of the system, for example. There might be others, incidentally, who would have other problems with them that you would want to make sure they didn't get an honour because there's something which you and I don't know about them, which is dodgy, and you might want to have a conversation saying, are you sure you want your name to go forward, sir or madam? And they might back out for that reason as well. But nonetheless, I still think that you'd want to have something which is where you can check. And if they have done the job for 20 years rather than 15, then it's fair that should be recognised.
Turning then to dodginess, and Sue, I'm sorry if this pushes you out of your comfort zone again, but I wonder if either of you have views about whether an honour should be permanent or whether it should be withdrawable, is that a word, in the event of wrong behaviour. There was a controversy just last year, I think, about a rapper who was spouting anti-Semitic bile extensively, and many people said that it should have its honour withdrawn. And there have been Sir Philip Green, for example, where allegations emerge. What do you think about that? Or you should have just an honour, maybe they should just expire after 5 years and you have to like reapply. So I don't know, I'm just making it up. Sue?
I think that feels right to me, that the nature of the honour system is that, and I think the criteria. I mean, there are criteria, aren't there? And there are certain, they are organised to celebrate achievement in different fields. So those things could be made more transparent. And that's right. It does seem to me that they come with an assumption that you are not an individual who's going to, do something deeply offensive, hurtful, sort of illegal, sort of basic criteria or standards. So I think that seems entirely reasonable to withdraw them. Should they be withdrawn and you reapply? I mean, I'm thinking on my feet because, as I say, I've not got a sort of ready-made answer, but I guess there is something about making the process more open, making the criteria clearer and the process more open, so that people can be nominated. But I'm still sort of slightly troubled by the idea that we could somehow arrive at a set of criteria that you could sort of evaluate normatively and in a way that everyone would agree with. Because I'm still sort of, I suppose, thinking about the people that I meet through the Sheila McKechnie Foundation who are campaigning, and as I said earlier, a great many of whom are pushing really issues up the hill against where majority opinion is, in a way that eventually will become that they're very often just they're pioneers of ideas and they're kind of early adopters. So they're people that are recognizing early on that there's a problem with something and it needs, whether that's an injustice or whether it's a social trend that they can see. And I can sort of see that if we were trying to be even-handed and recognise people that were offering value in a way that was sort of universally recognised, they would never make the cut. They might sort of posthumously, you might sort of get to a point where that campaign had become mainstream, the issues had become mainstream. But actually, at the moment, the honour system does allow for, unusual people, I think, to be honoured. And I recognise that it's imperfect because it's always in the view of a particular group. So whether there's something as well about who in the end makes the decision, because that I think is by the nominations committee, isn't it? The suggest, the recommendations are made by each department, as I understand it, and the nominations committee sort of says yes or no. And I wouldn't imagine they do much more due diligence than make sure none of us are sort of total lunatics. So, you know, maybe there's something about the process could be opened up, but yeah, I suppose I'm worried I wouldn't have got mine, John, if your system were.
I think it's a great challenge, John. And, you know, I know that, you know, in other areas of policy making, you're very much a friend of open markets and innovation. So, and I wonder if you can also respond to the other question in the chat, which is a sort of equity, equality one, which is how do you measure the challenges and obstacles someone might have had to overcome compared to someone else? So, you know, if giving away £1 million gets you 10 points, it's much easier for someone with £1 billion to do that than for me, who doesn't currently have £1 million, let alone for somebody who is, you know, scraping by on the minimum wage. So is there a way of balancing those kind of equality of opportunity things, which I know matter to you in terms of how you measure? And also then Sue's point is, how do you make a space for outliers and innovators in what anything that which was publicly determined, which I'm kind of in favor of, has a risk of being generic and homogenous, doesn't it?
So I think there are a bunch of outliers that you would want to recognise, and where I think a points-based system would probably come up short. So, for example, I think that awards for bravery and valour, whether they are, you know, on the battlefield rescuing drowning pets or whatever it might be, those are, I think, something you can't boil down to points, and I think that will be difficult. Because I'm a happy monarchist, I'd probably keep a small number back for those that are currently in the personal gift of the monarch, and I wouldn't want to alter those either. That's the one piece of mystique that I would like to maintain. Apart from that, and I think that Sue's ably persuaded me that you need to have a sort of a slightly different group of awards out. You know, we were talking about the points of light. It might be renamed or something like that, for volunteers who haven't achieved a vast amount compared to the rest of the country, but have nonetheless done something which everyone regards as very, very admirable just by volunteering for a very long time, or whatever it might be. So I think there's a small number of, as you put it, Polly, outliers that don't lend themselves to this, but you can still get an enormous amount of value from transparency, from objectivity, and from meritocracy for everything else, if you're just trying to base it on properly measured achievements and everybody knows what those achievements are. And I think that the danger we have is that if we start going too misty-eyed on achievements and mystique, that actually just becomes a sort of code for saying, actually, we just kind of like dishing them out to our mates. And it's just a question of whether or not it's our mates or someone else's mates. And if it's someone else's mates, it counts as cronyism. And if it's our mates, they're thoroughly deserving. And actually, that won't do. That's not an answer which any of us, I think, should be comfortable with. So for most of this stuff, I would argue that objectivity and transparency are hugely, hugely to be aimed for. But with those couple of very small, very defined, but I think quite important other categories for a very small number of outliers. But let's not push them too far.
I'm glad you're going to let the Queen offer a few to people in her household. Sue.
Oh, I was going to say, can I ask a question? Or is that sort of a...
Of course.
Well, I was going to sort of say, as we're here, John, what can be done to, I guess, you know, create the space for this discussion to be had more widely? Because we wrote to the Cabinet Office with our suggestion for changing the word empire, and they replied saying any change would require legislation, but in their view, the low rates of people declining honours and levels of diversity increasing means that there's evidence that no change is necessary. I mean, that was obviously in response to our particular request, but our sort of general sense is that there's not a huge sense of there being any urgency within Cabinet Office and presumably therefore within government at the moment, even though, as I said earlier, actually in recent decades there has been quite a lot of momentum and it sort of come and gone. But what do you think? What's your sense of there being any appetite for any changes? And if it isn't there, what do you think we can do to try and build it?
Well, see, I think you're right that because the honour system is kind of, it sort of happens over there for most of us, and most of us think it's sort of laughably unlikely that any of us, I mean, you said so that when you got your letter, it rendered you speechless for only the second time in your life. It was, you know, clearly a wonderful, but, you know, completely unexpected surprise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so because for most of us, it is something which is, you know, not looked for, not expected, laughably unlikely for most of us. I don't think that it sort of impinges on most of us as something that might matter to us. And so therefore, while I think that there's a huge potential upside, there's a huge potential opportunity to make our society better through this, because it doesn't sort of necessarily impinge on most people, I think it's hard to sort of get people marching in the streets, because it would just feel a bit un-British, I think is part of the difficulty. However, I think it's still possible. And you've only got to look at, you know, if you go back, I don't know, when did the Sunday Times start publishing its rich list? 20 years ago? Don't know. Before that, it would probably have been seen as deeply, deeply sort of, you know, dodgy to sort of boast about wealth, or to even mention it in polite society. No one would have talked about such things. And now it's kind of normal. Yeah, it happens every year, and people look it up, and it's quite interesting, and then the world moves on. You can envisage, and I'd love to get a newspaper or someone else, perhaps Demos would do it with me, to start publishing a sort of draft version of the talent list. And because if you started publishing a draft version of the talent list saying, here's the criteria we're applying, and you pretty soon get people saying, well, hang on a second, but if my rival at that other firm over there, who's you know, senior partner of that law firm is getting it, and I'm senior partner of this law firm, why aren't I on the list when he or she is, when they are? So I think you could start to create something if you just started doing it. And I think that it might actually then create some legs. It might then create some followership and get some wind in its sails, because people would start to see both the unfairness of the current system, but also the opportunity that could be created if we had a society that did this properly.
There's a good question that's come through about, have there been any studies to understand why people accept honours, and thinking particularly of Black, Asian, ethnic minority communities who feel compelled to accept to further their careers. So I guess, you know, that it feels right, doesn't it, that to do some deeper analysis as to who has or hasn't received honours back through time, you know.
And so I'd be interested as well to know whether or not those figures about who's turned down honours, is that people who've been offered them and they've then turned them down or handed them back? As opposed to people for whom soundings were taken and they sort of said, oh, I'd never accept something like that, and therefore it was never offered in the first place, but actually probably ought to count as a refusal, but isn't in the figures at all. I've no idea how they do it, but I'd just be interested to know their methodology to see whether or not that's a really robust piece of data that they're offering.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Although it does occur to me that, you know, it's clearly right that I'm sure that, you know, for the government this isn't a sort of keeping you up at night sort of preoccupation, but actually twice a year when the list is announced, there is also quite a lot of public debate, isn't there? And there usually are people who are offered honours who then do decline them, and there's lots of sort of famous names, aren't there? But I was struck that Bernadine...
FOI, the numbers. You might be able to get some raw numbers from FOI.
Yes.
I don't know.
You might well, but I was going to just mention that Bernadine Evaristo was offered hers last year for winning the Booker Prize, the first Black woman to win the Booker Prize. And I thought her response was interesting, because she said, I think I should accept this, because otherwise people of colour are excluded from these institutions and cultural norms that we have. And then that extends to our exclusion elsewhere. So I guess it sort of reminded me of that's a tactical decision, isn't it? Do you sort of stay in systems and seek to reform them, or do you refuse and stay outside? Both legitimate, but I thought interesting that she felt that actually she wanted to accept it but push from within, and she has called for that name change.
And so just as another example of the same thing, you know, there are plenty of former MPs who have voted against the House of Lords in its current form in all times, who, when they're offered a peerage, gratefully accept it and disappear at the other end to sit on the red benches nonetheless. Same sort of argument applies.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the other thing that we could think about, I'm just sorry, it's just sort of occurred to me, is that people that receive an honour get to pass it on to someone who they feel best embodies the spirit of why they received theirs. maybe that would reinforce what we would in the end feel was a totally wrong distribution, but there would be something quite nice about recognising that actually there are a great many different types of people that receive honours. In fact, I mean, I'm going to pay very close attention to the list when it comes out this year just to see, but it does span, doesn't it? People like hairdresser to the Queen's concert or whatever. Do you know what I mean? The sort of the ones that make us all laugh. But there are lots and lots of people who we wouldn't know ordinarily who are receiving honours, and so maybe that's something else, is to sort of ask them to be involved in the nomination. But
it's also the case that the media, unsurprisingly, are much more interested in putting celebrities on the front pages of the newspapers than unsung heroes, because celebrities sell newspapers more effectively. I'm really keen for us to kind of take this conversation forward. I think, remember that the Prime Minister, one of his first statements, that he wanted to unite the country. And these things have symbolic and social value and meaning. And I think that there is an opportunity for the Prime Minister to put advice to the monarch about how to reform this. So I'm hoping perhaps John and I, and perhaps Sue, we could write to the Prime Minister and make some suggestions, drawing some of these ideas and others from other contributors together. I think we are running out of questions, and in the end, I think there's a real danger that we all agree too much to extend this conversation much further. But I'm really grateful to both of you for joining us. Do you have any kind of final reflections, John, Sue? I'm glad John has slightly altered his position to accommodate Sue's input, which is feels very demos.
I was very, very struck by Sue's point that she thought it was a bit of a sort of dragon's den to start off with. But the point about dragon's den, I think, is that only one person gets to win through in the end. Whereas on this one, at least, we can, there's nothing. I think our ideas are complementary rather than being an either or choice. So come on in, the water's lovely for both of us.
Oh gosh, see, I'm about to spoil it, because I was going to say that actually the changing of the word actually is so easy and doable and can be done now, whereas a lot of these other reforms would take time and a lot of discussion. So of course they're not exclusive, they really aren't, but as a
maybe you can crowbar the door open with one small change. Great. Well, I'm really grateful to you for the discussion. I'm grateful to those who've joined us. We will be sharing the recording on social media later. So if you want to share it with your friends and colleagues, please do. Thank you so much for your questions, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.